Hi everyone, I'm going to be walking you through the mini lesson, Readers Interpret the Meaning of Figurative Language the author uses to describe a character in the story. This addresses Standard 4 of the Common Core. I'm going to dive in and just show you all the different pieces that are included with this mini lesson. This happens to be part of my science fiction fantasy reading unit, one of 20 mini lessons. So we'll start out with the teacher view. Here's the lesson plan for the teacher. It starts with a teaching point. Figurative means the opposite of literal. The literal meaning of words is their actual dictionary definition, whereas figurative language is when authors use words to mean something special that is different than the dictionary definition. Authors often create figurative language by comparing two unlike things to one another. Today we're going to explore how authors use figurative language to describe characters. As you can see on the teacher plan, it just really does a nice job of walking you through the different pieces that the mini lesson contains, prompts that you can use with students throughout the different pieces of the mini lesson. So next I'm going to show you the reference sheet that goes with today's mini lesson. Today's reference sheet is called Figurative Language Reference Guide, and it just walks through all the different types of figurative language, gives the definition of them, and then shows examples of that type of figurative language used in different books. So that is what I would go over with students next. Next up on the lesson plan, we've got an oral reading fluency piece. I love incorporating this. This is having students read one page of their book aloud to a partner. After they read it aloud, there's a mini lesson connection question, and it is, did the author use any figurative language on the page you read aloud? What did the figurative language describe? Once you get the oral reading fluency routine down with your students, it can take 2 to 3 minutes to do in class. Next up is the interactive read aloud. So throughout the science fiction fantasy reading unit, I would be reading a book aloud to students, and they would also have a science fiction fantasy book of their own. So as I'm reading our read aloud book, I would start by asking students to take out their figurative language reference guide and read through the different types of figurative language with one another to just refresh themselves on that. At this point, this is something that hopefully they have been exposed to, but then this would just be a refresher of that. There's ideas for stopping points during the interactive read aloud. I recommend only picking 2 to 3 so you're not continuously stopping, but there's just ideas of if you could stop, what could you say, what prompts could you use. For example, you could have students with the partner turn and talk stop at a place in the text that contains a piece of figurative language to describe a character and ask them to turn and talk to the prompt, how does this piece of figurative language help you understand this character? For these next pieces, I'm going to go into the modeling. So for the modeling, I always show students exactly what I'm asking them to do and show them what proficiency of that would look like. So this is the formative assessment that goes with today's mini lesson. It's a 3-column chart where students cite a piece of figurative language, say what kind of figurative language it is, and then explain what the figurative language means and how it helps them understand a specific character in the book. So you can just kind of take a look. I did this exit ticket based on the book Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt, and I cited a piece of textual evidence about the man in the yellow hat, and I explained, what it said about him and what the figurative language meant. So I would share this explicitly with students so they could see that this is what proficiency on this piece of formative assessment looks like. One other thing I really always like to share with students on the exit ticket that they will receive, I do include the proficiency rubric, and I always like to go over this column with students of the meets proficiency and just read over what does a meets proficiency look like, what is the criteria needed. So correctly cites a piece of figurative language that describes a character in the book, correctly identifies the type of figurative language cited, and thoroughly explains the meaning of the figurative language and how it helps him or her understand the character better. Every mini lesson also includes a presentation. So all those pieces of the mini lesson that I was showing you on the teacher guide, this is broken down as a presentation that can guide your your presentation as you give this mini lesson to students. So it just really breaks down the different pieces, and you can just have it up and going as you are giving the lesson. I'm doing distance learning right now, and I also use this where I put this on my Google Classroom, and this is kind of my talking pieces with students as I'm going through the daily lesson. One other thing I wanted to point out to you that is included would be the questions for reading conferences or reading strategy small groups. So if you do one-on-one reading conferences with students or you do reading strategy small groups or guided reading, let's study, that kind of thing, there are some extra prompting questions that you can use that are specific to this mini lesson. Once again, for me, I'm doing distance learning right now, and I've just gotten in the habit of I have, Mondays, these 5 students stay back, Tuesdays, these 5 students stay back, so that every student stays back on a Google Meet with me for like the last 5 to 10 minutes of class every day. And I usually just pick 2 or 3 of these questions to go over with students and talk through in that small group setting when there's only 5 of us on a live Google Meet. So you can just see some of the questions I've included there related to today's mini lesson. End of the mini lesson, bring everybody back together and include that share piece. This would be something if you are in person learning right now. And that is the mini lesson for today that I wanted to share with you. Hope it was helpful to see all the different pieces. If you have questions about the reading units, just so you know, the reading units that are currently available, there's a science fiction fantasy, historical fiction, realistic fiction, and soon to be released expository nonfiction. And this is of 9/11 of 2020. So more reading units will be released for a total of 7 reading units, creating a year-long reading curriculum that you can scope and sequence out to meet the needs of your students. Every reading unit contains 20 unique mini lessons aligned to standards.